If you're trying to memorize every scale shape, arpeggio pattern, and chord shape on the fretboard, just stop it. You're missing the forest for the trees. In this video, we're going to keep it very simple and focus on 3 short but powerful exercises you can do for just a couple minutes each day that will help you finally using the entire neck and actually knowing what you're doing in just a matter of days. These exercises are great for starting out, but even if you're experienced, exercise 3 will definitely still be a challenge. So give it a try, see if you can hang. Okay, so today we're going to get into the 3 most important skills you need to learn the fretboard. I'm going to explain each one, show you how to do it, and then I'll give you an exercise that you can use to practice it. We're going to be using the caged system, which leverages the shapes of the 5 main open position chords. That's C, A, G, E, and D. And it uses them in almost a copy and paste way all over the guitar neck. It's a really useful system, but it is very dense. So you've probably seen all the charts and the diagrams of the caged system. But all that info leaves you wondering, where do I even start? Let's work smart instead of hard. You don't need to learn the whole system right away. I believe that there are 3 key skills that can get you most of the way there with just a couple minutes a day. So let's get into it and learn how to practice them. Skill number 1, memorizing the notes on the bass strings. The most important note of a chord is its root. And when we're starting out in the caged system, the root will always be the lowest sounding note of the chord. All of the caged chords have their roots on strings 4 through 6, which I often call the bass strings. So the first thing you should do is build up your ability to ID a note on those bass strings as quickly as possible, because eventually you're going to use those notes to build chords all over the neck. Now, what's the best way to go about memorizing those notes? Remember, pure memorization is never ideal. Always find a why and you'll remember things better. Instead of rote memorization, you could start by simply learning to count the frets. So here's a simple breakdown to help you get started learning how to count frets if you don't know how already. First, the open strings on the guitar are, from low to high sounding, E, A, D, G, B, E. Just remember, Eddie ate dynamite, goodbye Eddie. On the guitar, each fret is a half step apart. Musically, each letter is 2 half steps or 1 whole step apart, meaning they have a sharp or a flat between. So C to D has C sharp in between. There are 2 exceptions to that rule, E to F and B to C. Those are only a half step apart. Remember those exceptions with the acronym, every fret brings challenges. If you can remember all that, then you simply start with an open string and count your way up the neck fret by fret until you get to a note. So for example, if I pick the 4th string, that's D, let me see what the 6th fret is. So I go D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, and here's the 6th fret, that's G sharp or A flat. Now if you do that enough, you'll memorize it naturally just from doing a lot of repetitions. But you're probably going to get sick of having to start at 0 every time you want to count your way up the fretboard. For example, what if you're at the 10th or the 11th fret? That's where marker frets come in. Marker frets are key points on the neck that are used as shortcuts to orient yourself on the neck, so it's not this long hallway that you always have to enter from the beginning door even when you get to the very end. The first marker fret you should learn is the 12th fret. That's where the note names repeat themselves over again, so it's the same as the open strings. You can count backwards from there for some of the higher frets. So for example, if I'm looking for a G on the 5th string, when I get to the 12th fret, I know that's A, same as the open string name. And I can go 2 frets back, A, A flat, G, instead of having to count 10 frets to get up. The second marker fret to learn is the 5th fret, because that's where notes repeat themselves related to other strings. For example, the 5th fret of the low E string is A, which is the exact same note as the open 5th string. From the 6th to the 4th strings, the notes here are A, D, G, which is easy to remember because it's the same name as the open strings from 5 to 3, A, D, G. By the way, this is why people like using the 5th fret to tune against the open strings. Finally, you'll see there's this gap between the 5th and the 12th fret. So I like to use the 7th fret as the next marker fret to fill it in. It's an important fret, it's a good position that's still comfortable to play in, so it works really well. Plus, it's easy to memorize because strings 6 through 3 spell the word bead, B, E, A, D. So as an example, if I'm looking for an F on the 5th string, I could just go straight to my marker fret here of the word bead. There's E, and then 1 fret up, and I've found F. Now, if this is new to you, this might seem like a lot, but you can get good at this faster than you think. And as you get better and better at using fret counting combined with these marker frets, eventually you'll be able to ID any note instantly. This is just a much better way to learn the notes than starting with rote memorization from flashcards or a diagram, because you're making yourself work for the info, which forces you to internalize it on a deeper level. Our first exercise is a game I like to play with my students to make it more fun to find the notes. When you first start out, it might take 1 or 2 minutes to even play just 1 round, but after a couple days, you can play quite a few rounds in just a couple of minutes. The rules are simple. The goal is to find the same letter name note on consecutive strings, and here we'll do just the bass strings because that's all we care about memorizing. The notes can be different octaves, but the same letter name. For example, here's an E, here's another E, and even though they sound an octave apart, for our purposes, it works. Once you get from string 6 to 4, you'll make your way back on consecutive strings the same way you came to reinforce. So as an example, if I picked G for my search and destroy game, I would find a G on the 6th string first, then I'd jump to the 5th string and find it, then the 4th string, then I'll make my way back. G, G, G. This will be enough to challenge you for a while, but once you get the hang of it, do it in rhythm with a metronome for a real challenge. Using a metronome will force you to take it to the level you need to recognize things quick, which you absolutely do need because remember, you're learning to ID these notes because they're the root notes of the chords that we're going to build. So you have to be able to get to them really fast. So if I used a metronome, it would sound something like this. Let's say I'm looking for A. It would be A, 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 A. Skill number 2, learn the transposable caged chord shapes. If you're trying to learn the fretboard, that's usually because you've exhausted your resources in open position, which are the first 4 frets. And now you want to explore the other 80% of the real estate on the guitar neck. Remember that the caged system is a way to sort of copy and paste the shapes of these 5 open position chords all over the guitar neck. But a big sticking point for people is that it's hard to recognize it as copying and pasting because for your fingers, the chords are actually different as you paste them up the neck. Let me show you an example with the E chord. An open position E chord looks like this. But as you can see, it also uses 3 open strings. So if I just copy and paste this up the neck, it'll muddy the new chord with those open strings. So this is where using a transposable shape comes in handy. Transposing means to shift music from one place to another. So we need to shift the full E chord up the neck, which means we need to move the chord and somehow move the open strings as well, almost as if you're shortening the end of the guitar. Now, if you've ever used a capo, this is exactly what happens. So let me use my capo to create a new end of the guitar, clipping it here on the 3rd fret. Now I'll create the E chord the same distance away from my capo as it was from the nut of the guitar before. Now I have a fully transposed E chord shape, although in this case it's a G chord because I played it at the 3rd fret, which has its bass note as G. But when we're playing all over the neck, we don't want a capo that just stays in one place. So instead, we can use our finger as a bar to create a human capo. And this is where it starts to look a little different for your fingers. Now I have to use my first finger to create my human capo and my remaining 3 fingers to make my E chord shape. And this is basically what all bar chords are. They're open position chord shapes where you use one of your fingers as a human capo. So as you can see, this chord shape and this chord shape are different for your fingers. And yet, in theory, it's the same shape. You just have to get used to creating a new end of the guitar with your bar finger. It's likely you already even know the E and the A transposable shapes because they're the most common bar chords. But what about C, G, and D? Well, let's go over all 5 of the transposable shapes so you can learn them right now. We'll start with the C chord shape. Normal C uses fingers 1, 2, and 3 like this. If we were to make it transposable, the easiest way to get this is make a bar at the 1st fret and make a C chord with your remaining fingers. It should sound like this. Now you can move that all the way around the neck. A couple of easier ways to do this would be doing a half bar, since we don't actually need the full bar here. Or if you're playing with just your fingers and you want to get 4 strings, grab the 3rd string only. Next is the A chord. We play that A chord at the 2nd fret. So if we put our human capo down, our bar, at the 1st fret, the A chord goes down at the 3rd fret. It's a bit of a stretch, but it works. The fingerings might be different, but the chord is the same. Next, the G chord. This is the trickiest of all the chords. We know the G chord shape, no matter how you finger it, involves some notes on the 3rd fret, which means when we move our bar up, we're going to have to stretch 2, 3 frets away to get our next G chord. This is impractical, especially at the earlier frets. So we can make a condensed version of that chord to help move ourselves around the neck. Here's the one I like to do the most. Let's say we had our bar at the 3rd fret. Instead of doing a full 6-string bar, try just doing a 4-string bar. Let's eliminate this note on the 5th string, put our 3rd finger on the bass note, and our pinky on the high note. So this would have been the G chord, but we're taking away the 2 finger and just doing a 4-string bar. What's happening with the 5th string? It's just being blocked. Even this shape will be challenging, but if you work on it for a while, it'll get easier and easier. Next, we have our E chord. This is the one that you probably know and love, our regular E shape. If we put a bar at the 1st fret, we just slide that E shape over and use new fingers. And finally, we have the D chord. This one's interesting because it's not technically a bar chord. It only uses 4 strings if you know the regular D chord. So if you were to move it up 1 fret, put your first finger on the 4th string, and now we have to use these 3 fingers to make the new shape of a D chord. This is the one that feels the least like the original shape, but as you can tell, it still is the D chord. So now here's the second simple exercise you can do. This one takes just a few minutes at first, and after a few days, you'll be doing it in seconds all over the neck. I call it human capo chords. All you have to do is pick a fret on the neck that you want to be your human capo fret. And then you play all 5 chord shapes in any order on that fret. And it just gives you a chance to practice all of those transposable shapes in one spot. So as an example, if I pick the 5th fret, I'll bring my human capo up here to the 5th fret, and I'll go through each one. So I have C. Very important, take your fingers off between each one, so you get a chance to remake it. Next we have A. Next we have G. Next we have E. And finally we have D. Again, the goal of that is just to get comfortable with the new fingerings for the same shapes that you know. And if you didn't know the bass notes of those chords already, make sure you're taking note of where the bass note is, because that comes in handy for our 3rd skill. Skill 3, putting things together. So you can find the bass notes all over, and you have the movable chord shapes learned. But to do anything useful, you have to combine those 2 skills into one, so you can make chords all over the guitar neck. We're going to ID notes on those low bass strings, and then use that bass note to create a chord using the transposable shapes we know. So you remember the order of operations in math? PEMDAS, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Well, there's sort of an order of operations to do more complex musical action, like creating a chord anywhere on the neck as well. Luckily for us, it's a little shorter and it's easier to remember though. It's just 3 words: bass, shape, quality. Now it's pretty self-explanatory, but this means that if you want to find a chord anywhere on the neck, just do the following. Bass, find the root on a bass string. If you're looking for a G chord, first you'd have to find a G on any of those bass strings and take a note of which string it's on. So if I found one here, it's the 6th string. But if I found one here, that's the 5th string. Shape, match it to a transposable shape. To do this, you have to match the string that your bass note is on to a shape. So here's a quick reminder of what bass strings correspond to which chords. E and G chords have their roots on the 6th string. A and C chords have their roots on the 5th string, and the D chord has its root on the 4th string. So that means if I found my G on the 6th string, I would be making the E shape. Or I could make the G shape. If I had my G on the 5th string, I could do the A shape, or I could do the C shape. If you didn't know where the exact bass note of those chord shapes are before, burn it into your brain right now. And finally, quality. You can modify your shape for the quality of the chord. And quality means major, minor, etc. For example, the E shape has major, minor, and 7th shapes that work off of the same bass note. That's why you can get a bar chord like this, and make it minor, make it 7, very easily. Now it's best to start using just major chords for a while until you get the system down better. But once you have the hang of it, start choosing different chord qualities, like throw in some minor chords. Exercise 3, caged chord connections. All right, here's the final exercise you can do every day. It can only take a minute or 2 to do this one if you just play one round of it. And eventually you can get through multiple rounds pretty fast. So your goal is to play the same chord up and down the neck using all 5 caged shapes, or just 4 if you end up running out of space. To do this, start by picking a letter and then find the lowest version of that chord. Then continue up the neck in the order of the word caged. Now it's not always going to start with the C shape, but it will always follow the order of caged. So for example, if I started with A, I would go A shape, G shape, E shape, D shape, and then end with the C shape. So let's do a couple of rounds of this together so you can see how it works. We'll start with A. That's an easy note to remember. So if we start with the lowest version of our A chord, it's right here. And let's make our way up the neck. So that's the A shape. So after A in the word caged comes G. So I'm going to do my G shape next. Then E. Then D. And then I'm going to finish with C. Next we'll do F sharp, and with this one I'll go a little slower and show you how to do bass shape quality. So first we find an F sharp note. That's the furthest left note we could find. That's on the E string, so I'm going to use either the E shape or the G shape. Well, I couldn't quite fit a G chord shape in here because I ran out of space, so let me make it an E shape. After E comes D, so I have my F sharp up there using the D shape. After D comes C, so I'm going to be using something on the 5th string. I have to find an F sharp up there. Oh, here it is. Now I make my C chord shape. Then comes the A shape. Uses the exact same note because A is also on the 5th string as its bass note. And here I'd only use 4 chords because I'm running out of space, but if you could fit it or if you have a different guitar, you could use the G shape way up there. And just a side note, once you get really good at this and fast at it, try playing them out of order so you don't just memorize by rote the order of chords, but you're really finding them. So there you have it, the 3 most important skills and 3 exercises you can do for just a few minutes every day. When you get this down, you'll find you understand the entire fretboard so much better. And you'll be 100 times more ready to incorporate all those other things like the arpeggios and the scale patterns from the Cage system as well. If this video was helpful, I would love to hear from you. I'm still new, I'm building my channel, and I'm really open to making content that works best for you, so don't be shy. My goal is to build an audience of guitar learners who like my style and to give them what they want. So you could be a huge part of that by subscribing and letting me know. If you're like me, and you sometimes have a hard time getting the instrument out and practicing or getting into the consistent schedule of practicing, check out Practice Pilot. It's a card game that helps guitarists not only have fun practicing, but make the progress that they want. I've developed it after years of teaching hundreds and hundreds of students and noticing the same patterns. I'll throw a link in the description and you can be one of the first to pre-order the very first edition of it coming out in early 2025.